winter, staying here tonight.
Howdy ha, Shindiggers. My name is Steve Holroyd. By my side, as always, is Sammy the Wonder Pug. And you are listening to The Front Row, brought to you by the Philly Soccer Page. Those of us of a certain age remember when dinosaurs were cold-blooded predecessors of reptiles, with tiny brains, scaly skin, clumsy gaits, and living solitary existences. Now, of course, we know that dinosaurs were warm-blooded, rather intelligent, possessing colorful feathers, living in family units, and were precursors to birds. Well, the carnivores at least. Anyway, a lot has changed in paleontology. One other area that has also seen significant changes in the landscape since the 1970s is the world of American soccer history. In the mid-1970s, the view was that the North American Soccer Leagues was the U.S.'s first attempt at Major League Soccer, and that the U.S. prior to that consisted entirely of semi-professional ethnic clubs whose players were all immigrants. We were told the 1930 U.S. World Cup team was made up entirely of British pros, and that the 1950 U.S. World Cup team that upset England was also an all-immigrant side, with the goals scored by Larry Gatens. With the exception of St. Louis, no American-born child ever kicked the ball until NASL teams held camps and introduced youngsters to the beautiful game in 1968. That's what we were told. Today, of course, we know better. As early as 1894, there was an attempt to establish a professional soccer league on these shores, the American League of Professional Football, the first professional soccer league outside of Great Britain. By now, the original American Soccer League of the 1920s is fairly well known to U.S. soccer fans. We also now know that the 1930 U.S. World Cup team that took third place in that inaugural tournament was made up primarily of native-born players playing in the ASL. We now know that the 1950 U.S. team was primarily made up of players born in the U.S., and that while the goal scorer in that famous game against England may have been foreign-born, his name was Joe, not Larry. And finally, we now know that throughout the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, native-born Americans starred in the second version of the American Soccer League. For all of this progress, however, there are still gaps in our soccer history. As we discussed a few podcasts ago, we still have these lost leagues. And today we want to talk about one of those lost leagues, the North American Soccer Football League. The U.S. is second, or third if you count the very short-lived attempt in 1894, attempt at a professional soccer league that expanded beyond the New York area, and the first to go international by including teams from Canada. With the end of World War II, the thought was that returning GIs, American servicemen, who had been exposed to the game in Europe, would come home as fans of what was even then known as the world's game. Accordingly, a number of savvy businessmen wanted to get in on the ground floor of professional soccer, a sport that drew significant crowds in Europe. One such businessman was Ferdinand Wiseman, himself a former player and owner of the successful Chicago Maroons Club of that city's National Soccer League. Wiseman initially applied for membership in the American Soccer League for the 1946-47 season. The ASL was still primarily a New York area league at that point, and was not eager to incur the travel costs needed to play in such distant lands as Chicago. Instead, the league suggested that Wiseman establish a Midwest division for the ASL. Wiseman thanked them for the advice and decided to go one step further. As he explained at the time, Wiseman noticed the large crowds drawn by the National Hockey League in Midwest cities like Detroit and Chicago, even though the teams were made up entirely of foreigners, in other words, Canadians. Figuring fans would support soccer teams made up of foreigners just as fervently, Wiseman established the North American Soccer Football League, with play to begin in the summer of 1946. Joining the Maroons were the team's crosstown rivals in the National Soccer League, the Chicago Vikings. Also joining were Detroit Wolverines, initially called Tigers, but I guess running into trademark issues even then. Adding further credibility to the new circuit was the addition of Pittsburgh Strazzers, a team that won the National Amateur Challenge Cup in 1940 and 1943 and were runners-up in 1944. Rounding out the league was Toronto Greenbacks, a team obviously from Canada. The NASFL sought to be big league and made arrangements to play their matches in major league facilities. For instance, the Maroons played at Wrigley Field, the Vikings established Comiskey Park as their home ground, and Detroit played home matches at University of Detroit Stadium. The initial 1946 season found the teams playing an 8-game schedule, facing each other twice. Detroit Wolverines won the regular season crown, led by league-leading goal scorer Gil Heron. Heron's 15 goals made up over half of the team's 29 goals that year, and the Jamaican-born Canadian-bred striker quickly established himself as the league's most exciting player. The 24-year-old was also a bit of a pioneer, being one of the first black players in American professional soccer. Pittsburgh struggled through the season with 3 wins and 5 losses, but featured a locally born star. Nicholas DiOrio was born in Morgan Township, PA, and starred as a forward with the Strassers for a number of years. He was a member of the 1950 World Cup team, although he did not play the day the Americans shocked England. Chicago Vikings also proved to be a major disappointment in the league, notwithstanding the exploits of Roscoe Anderson and his 7 goals. The Vikings were able to take some solace, however, from the fact that they won the U.S. Open Cup that year, defeating Punta Delgada of Fall River. The league final saw champion Detroit face off against runner-up Toronto. The Greenbacks, led by the scoring duo of Harry Phillips and Freddie McCusker, upset the Wolverines 3-0 to be crowned league champions. While the quality of play on the pitch was impressive, the clubs did not fare so well at the gate. Crowds were in the 1,500 to 3,000 per match range, larger than most amateur or semi-pro leagues, but nowhere near enough to support professional salaries and the rental fees of major league stadiums. Nevertheless, the league endeavored to persevere into a second season. Wiseman, for his part, stepped down as league president to concentrate on improving his Maroon side for 1947. Leslie O'Connor, vice president and general manager of the Chicago White Sox of baseball, took over as NASFL president. Notwithstanding the prior season's difficulties, the NASFL managed to expand in 1947, adding St. Louis Raiders to the lineup. The league planned to play a split season, with each half made up of 10 games. The circuit also announced that it would spare no expense in attracting top talent. For instance, Wiseman announced that the Maroons would have no fewer than 11 imported players from Poland, Scotland, England, and Canada. In a press report from the period, Wiseman claimed that soccer had international appeal, that it had never been presented in the U.S., quote, in the same exciting fashion as hockey because of inferior players, close quote. According to Wiseman, defending champion Toronto was, quote, packed with English and Scottish players, close quote. Detroit featured, quote, several Mexican stars, close quote. Pittsburgh brought, quote, a couple of English booters, close quote. Chicago Vikings were, quote, dickering for Swedish talent, close quote. And St. Louis, true to form, were, quote, well-stocked with homegrown talent in a city that is the nation's soccer hotbed. With the first half beginning in April, fans were treated to some entertaining soccer. Pittsburgh, despite losing Nick DiOrio in the offseason to Chicago Vikings, relied on goal scoring from Felix Mitchell to lead the circuit in the first half. Toronto again finished in second, with Phillips still scoring goals, and the All-American St. Louis Raiders finished tied on points, but third because of win differential, thanks to having the 2 top scorers in the league, Harold Gunning with 7 goals and Arnie Muntz with 6 goals. Gil Heron netted 4 goals with Detroit. However, major financial problems were affecting the league, with high travel costs a significant factor. To make matters worse, a power struggle erupted among league administrators. When it became known that Wiseman's spending spree resulted in the Maroons operating at a $75,000 deficit, play was temporarily suspended around the league to allow teams to get their financial houses in order. Eventually, the first half was completed. Oddly, as this was only the first half of a planned 2-part season, there was yet another playoff. This time, however, the regular season champion held on to win the crown, with Pittsburgh defeating Toronto in a 2-leg series. At this point, though, the league was in a state of chaos. The second half was to begin in September, with 6 games played through September-October. However, the aforementioned power struggle meant that no one was sure who was running the league. For instance, Pittsburgh newspapers said the league had been renamed the American Professional Soccer League. Meanwhile, the 2 Chicago teams dropped out, but were supposed to be replaced by a new team, Chicago Tornadoes, made up of the best players from the Vikings and Maroons. It appears that a few games were actually played, including some games in July and August, which were to count in the standings. However, Detroit never fielded a team, and the whole thing collapsed abruptly. Now, vestiges of the NASFL remain. The Maroons and Vikings still exist, and the Raiders became an amateur squad, joining the St. Louis Major League and eventually evolving into National Amateur Power Kudos, a club that still exists today. One player to note out of this league was Gil Heron, who went on to make a name for himself. Spotted by Scott from Celtic while the storied Scottish club was touring North American, Heron was signed as the first black player for the Glasgow side in 1951, scoring in his debut with the club in a League Cup match. He made 3 other Cup appearances, scoring twice and earning the nicknames Black Arrow and Black Flash, but only appeared in 1 league match before being released. Heron then latched on with 3rd Lanark, where once again he proved productive in Cup matches with 5 goals in 7 games, but did not see any action in league play. After a brief sojourn with lower-level English League side Kidderminster Harriers, Heron returned to Detroit to rejoin Detroit Corinthians, a team where he played for before joining the Wolves. He later moved back to Canada, where he became involved in African-Canadian politics. Now, if the name Gil Heron sounds familiar, by the way, it may be because you have heard of his son, Gil Scott-Heron, poet, musician, and proto-rapper, best known for the classic track, "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised." Ultimately, the NASFL was a good idea but poorly executed. Now, shockingly, the lessons of its demise were largely ignored 20 years later with the arrival of the 2 leagues that would become the North American Soccer League. Fortunately, it can safely be said that Major League Soccer has avoided these pitfalls. In any event, the largely overlooked NASFL is worthy of mention, and we hope that we've been able to shed some light on that league in this podcast. That's it for this episode. As always, feel free to subscribe to us on iTunes, where ratings and reviews are always appreciated. You can follow us on Twitter at Section 107 Row A, and you can email us at soccermaven, that's soccer, M-A-V-N, at yahoo.com. Until next time, this is Steve Holroyd with Sammy the Wonder Pug, bidding you farewell and reminding you to keep your feet on the ground. Just keep your feet on the ground. It's a good idea. Ciao. Cause you're keener than Keegan, and you're better than best. We always knew you'd go far. You're a 70s football star.